Thank you, and thank you so much, Minister, for being with us. I just want to begin by saying that it's relatively rare that we see these kinds of press panels happening at COP that include both ministers and civil society. And this tells you how critical these two issues are to determining the success or failure of this COP. As the minister rightly said, the energy and equity outcomes of this COP go hand in hand. And that means that we are looking for outcomes, yes, on the provision of a loss and damage fund. But we are also looking for stronger language on the need to phase out fossil fuels. Currently, the draft text that we got of the cover decision in the middle of last night around 4 a.m. risks ignoring the demands of several parties that have been brought to the floor of this COP in the consultations and have been articulated in public media to include a phase out of all fossil fuels, not just a phase down of coal power in the decision text. Those calls have come from small island developing states and AOSIS members like Tuvalu and Vanuatu, from ILEC members like Colombia, who we will hear from later, Norway, the US, India, EU, UK, Denmark, Spain, France, Ireland. Countless parties at this point have said that this is one of their expectations of the outcome of this COP, and yet we continue to see the Egyptian presidency ignore those calls in their iterations of the draft cover text. COP27 also risks ignoring the science. We currently have in the draft text an acknowledgement of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's sixth assessment report on climate change. That report is clear. The science is unequivocal that if we are to keep the hope of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees alive, we need to accelerate the equitable phase out of coal, oil, and gas, and rapidly invest in just transitions to energy efficiency and renewable energy. We can't have a reference to the sixth assessment report and the importance of science, and then a bunch of text that fully ignores that science. Furthermore, we made a leap in Glasgow last year that this process of over 30 years finally acknowledged the source of the problem of climate change, which is the combustion and production of fossil fuels. Unfortunately, it limited that acknowledgement to only the phase down of coal power and the phase out of inefficient fossil fuel subsidies. That was a relatively weak reference. Nevertheless, it put this process on track to finally being able to have something meaningful to say on the energy transition, which is necessary in order for us to meet our climate goals. In the current text, even that relatively meek Glasgow language is watered down with the addition of rationalizing fossil fuel subsidies that are already inefficient and that we're seeking to phase out. It also ties the phase down of coal to national circumstances, rather than saying that we should be expecting all countries to phase down coal and targeting support for that phase down and for just transition to the most vulnerable countries and to developing countries that need that support most. We are seeing a lot of references pop up in these draft texts to false solutions, opening the door to clean technologies that we know are often code for things like carbon capture and storage. And we see that this current text prioritizes energy security and energy access, which, yes, of course, are priorities, but it prioritizes those over the need for us to be meeting our climate.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Honorable Ministers from Vanuatu, Costa Rica, New Zealand, and the Federal States of Micronesia, Excellencies and distinguished guests, good morning. The government of Antigua and Barbuda is elated to continue its support to this initiative from the Republic of Vanuatu. Advisory opinions from the International Court of Justice command tremendous legal and political authority. Given that the ramifications of climate change affect so many aspects of human life especially for persons living in small island developing states. The small island nations of AOSIS would greatly benefit from the authoritative advice on the legal implications of climate change. Unfortunately, we have fallen into a practice of separating concepts into silos. We have a treaty regime for the climate, we have a treaty regime for the law of the sea, and we have a treaty regime for human rights. But yet we rarely examine how the obligations and rights of states and individuals are interlinked and build upon one another across these different silos. The moment of this advisory opinion is now. Recognition of these interlinkages by the ICJ, an acknowledgement of how obligations across the ecosystems of economic law, international law support one another, will no doubt help the cause of nations facing the adverse effects of climate change, and additionally, those nations seeking to increase their climate ambition. This initiative is complementary to the current international legal regimes that are already in existence and will help to move all climate ambition in the right direction. Vanuatu has created a wave. It has started in the islands, but is now surging across the world. Support for the initiative has come from neighboring SIDS and Pacific nations, from other SIDS like the Caribbean nation, from Latin America, from the African continent, and from developed country partners. Antigua and Barbuda is extremely proud to be on the right side of history here today in a nation that is full of history. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. And now I'd like to give the floor to one of our developed country party members of this core group. It gives me great pleasure to introduce the Minister of Climate Change of New Zealand, the Honorable James Shaw.
O tēnā koutou katoa. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou. I just wanted to start by commending Vanuatu for this initiative and for taking the leadership role on behalf of, frankly, all of us around the world. I also want to thank the partner countries who are supporting Vanuatu in this effort as well. It's good to be amongst friends, and I think the more that we can get on board, the greater the chance of success that this has. New Zealand has always has strongly stood for the international rules-based order, for the rule of law and for human rights. And so from our perspective, a reference to the ICJ makes absolutely perfect sense. The courts and the ICJ in particular are there to provide access to justice for countries and parties that otherwise tend to be excluded through processes such as the ones that we find ourselves in here, or find it very hard to get access to that kind of justice. So it does make perfect sense from our perspective, and it's a very significant initiative. So we're right in behind it. We're really looking forward to seeing how it goes. We're looking forward to seeing it succeed the vote in the coming months, and we'd like to invite all other countries to get on board and to support the initiative as well. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. In the interest of time, we will take 3 questions from journalists in the audience, with a preference for female from the Global South. And we will take those 3 questions and then give an opportunity to each one of the panel members to reflect on any of those questions or any other final statements they'd like to make. So the floor is open for questions from journalists or the press or anyone who's in this room today. See if I can get a female first. Okay, in that case, we'll go ahead with the gentleman in the front. Please go ahead with your question.
Hi, Ben Spencer from the Sunday Times in London. If you're resorting to the international courts, what does that say about the limits of the UNFCCC process? Have we achieved all we can through 27 COPs now?
Thank you very much. Any other questions? I see one here in this corner.
Georg Ehring, German Radio Deutschlandfunk. What consequences do you hope will arise from this decision clarification of the International Court of Justice? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question, and I see the lady here. Thank you so much.
Lindsay Fielder-Cook, Quaker United Nations Office, Geneva. How can we help you?
Fantastic. What I might do is start with the Honorable Minister Shaw and work our way backwards. You can reflect on any of those questions or any other points you'd like to make.
Yeah, thanks. I'd actually like to start with this question from the Sunday Times. So I see them as complementary. If you think about the UNFCCC process as analogous to a parliamentary process, and the ICJ is analogous to the domestic courts process, one actually reinforces the other. And so I think in countries that have got strong legal systems, they can be used to ensure that the parliamentary process works, or where there are gaps, can help to fill in those gaps or to highlight where the process is going wrong. So I don't see them as contradictory at all, but rather as complementary. Having said that, as I said in my opening remarks, in this process, the strong tend to dominate, and so there are something like 90 countries around the world that each emit less than 1% of the global total, and they often find it difficult individually or collectively to hold the line on 1.5 or in some of the other matters that are of most concern. And so the courts do give us a sort of an ability to kind of reinforce that. And having said that, I mean, it was the small island states that got 1.5 into the Paris Agreement in the first place. So, I don't mean to give the impression that this process is broken at all. It isn't broken. It's functional, but it is very, very challenging for the smaller countries. And so I think it is really important to have a complementary process, which is a legal jurisprudence process.
Thank you, Minister. Ana Villalobos, Costa Rica.
Thank you. I completely agree with your answer, and I think that this is a complementary process. And aside from that, others that can take place in other entities will always complement what we're doing in this process here at the negotiating arena. In terms of how you can help, I would say that, like in the case of Costa Rica, we're the only country in Latin America that is nowadays part of the core group. And of course, it would be fantastic if we can get other countries to join, not only from Latin America, which is our main goal, but also from other regions of the world. And I think that one thing that the office can do is accompany us with the right information, with the proper spaces for us to talk about what is happening, and of course encouraging to join the effort and the initiative that Vanuatu is leading, and understanding why it's important, what is it that we're looking for, and what you can get out of it. And I think that your office has the opportunity to do that, basically because it's in touch with a lot of countries, all the countries that are part of the process as well. So I think information as well, and for countries like us that do have the obligation and responsibility to make sure that at least our region gets into the same line and joins the process, we more than welcome any support that you can do, and in a way that we can make sure that other countries from Latin America join in. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Honorable Joseph, Antigua and Barbuda.
Thank you very much. Climate change is the greatest existential threat faced by human beings. and by humanity. It therefore means we have to examine all our institutions, all our laws, all our practices, to see how we can improve them. And it's natural for us to have evolution in our process. We improve our technology to meet the challenges we face, and so we must improve our laws as well. And so this is complementary to the UNFCCC. And the consequences should result in the protection of human lives and human well-being. And the greatest threat facing humanity now is in the small island developing states. We suffer a great deal, and we must look at our laws, look at our conventions, to see how we can create awareness. The question was asked how we can help. Well, we can help by advocating that it's time we put humanity as the focus of all our decision making. That is what the message is for me today. It doesn't matter whether you live in Vanuatu, or you live in Australia or Pakistan, wherever you live, you all are human beings. And the focus of human activity and decision making at every level should be a focus on humanity. I thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. And to wrap us up, the Honorable Regan Banu from Vanuatu.
Thank you. Yes, how you can help. We have a vote coming up in about a month, probably. We're trying to make sure we get that vote over the line with a simple majority of the members of the UNGA. So any help in getting countries to support the resolution in the UNGA, that's what we need immediately. Once it goes through, then we will need us all to make submissions to the court. There'll be a process where submissions are made to help the judges determine the advisory opinion. And I hope to see many, many young people, civil society groups, states, all coming well prepared to make their arguments, present their evidence, to allow the judges to come to the best advisory opinion that will be most useful to us. In terms of the outcomes of the advisory opinion, well, firstly, I believe it will greatly enhance the process of COP, future COPs, the process of negotiation. There'll be more clarity when we engage in negotiations. So that's the first one. Secondly, of course, it will help us to clarify and strengthen our own domestic laws and policies. We'll have more legal clarity on what our obligations are within our countries to our citizens. And that'll be very useful to have that extra piece of advice. And then thirdly, of course, we know that there's a lot of climate litigation going on right now in the world. There's a whole heap of it. And this will assist, of course, in those cases as well, to provide legal clarity which can assist courts to make decisions in those cases where we're already seeing citizens taking governments to court, we're seeing people taking companies to court, and that's not something that this advisory opinion is going to initiate, because it's already happening all over the world. It will come in to assist that process and provide courts with more persuasive precedent that they can use in making their decisions. Thank you.
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, join me in giving a resounding round of applause to not only the 4 leaders here, but all 18 members of the core group who have finally decided to put humanity at the front of climate decision making. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Now giving the floor to Japan. After Japan, it will be Turkey, but I'll just warn you that we are now at the end of our time, so we're just carrying on till we get thrown out. Japan?
Thank you, Excellency. I'd like to express my appreciation to the effort made by co-facilitator. Toward 2030, the end of this critical decade, it is important to create a mechanism to accelerate mitigation efforts by all countries, including developing and emerging countries. From this perspective, Japan would like to emphasize the importance of reaffirm to Glasgow Climate Pact. My colleague would like to make specific comments on several paragraphs.
Yeah, thank you very much. And my delegation supports basically option 2 in this document. And I'd like to make 5 specific comments, 1 as a general issue and 4 for each paragraph. The first one is a general comment. We would like to stress out that we should reaffirm the Glasgow Climate Pact. In that regard, we support to refer to the paragraph 20 to 39 of Glasgow Climate Pact in this document. Paragraph 2, my delegations cannot accept the last sentence of option 1 and 3 because the updating national determined contribution is crucial nature of the Paris Agreement. Paragraph 4, we support to continue this work until 20th session in 2030. Paragraph 15, we support to have CMA to discuss our work every year, but I would like to listen to other delegations' opinion about that. Paragraph 18, we support to have a review in 2026. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The last contribution that I can take today is from Turkey. Unfortunately, Algeria, Iceland, Oman, Bolivia, and Jordan will need to submit written comments to the Secretariat, as we have now been instructed that we should vacate the room. But before we do that, let me give the floor to Turkey. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Minister, Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, distinguished colleagues. I'll be very brief. Turkey supports on preamble, we prefer option 1. On paragraph 2, we prefer option 1. On paragraph 3, we prefer option 1. On paragraph 4, we prefer option 2. On paragraph 6, we prefer option 2. On paragraph 15, we prefer option 1. And finally, on paragraph 18, we prefer option 2. Thank you, Madam Minister.
Thank you very much. So, for all others, Algeria, Iceland, Oman, Bolivia, and Jordan, we can take written comments. Thank you very much, colleagues, for your time, for your commitment, for your willingness to share your views with us. We appreciate it. This session is now closed. Thank you.
To get rid of all fossil fuels tomorrow. As the minister points out, what we are calling for is a just and equitable transition away from dependence on fossil fuels and toward renewable energy. There are those who came to this COP with a plan to co-opt the notion of just transition, to use it to justify business as usual by selling us a lie that ongoing fossil fuel production is what's necessary for energy access to be met in those parts of the world that don't currently have access to energy, for development priorities to be met in those parts of the world that are looking to grow their economy. If fossil fuels were going to provide prosperity and energy access for everyone, they would have done so by now. Just transition is about acknowledging the fact that fossil fuels have not been serving the needs and the interests of people or the planet for well over a century. And acknowledging that we need strong investments from those companies and countries that have hoarded wealth from the production of fossil fuels over the last century. We need to be transferring that wealth into the hands of those nations that need it the most in order to transition away from fossil fuel dependence, and to build energy systems that are based on renewable energy. The reason that we are starting to see other multilateral initiatives pop up alongside the UNFCCC is precisely because this process was designed from the very start to ignore the problem of fossil fuels. And I think we have some pretty good indications as to why that might be. Fossil fuel companies and fossil fuel interests have been present at these COPs since their beginning. And indeed, this year, there were more fossil fuel lobbyists in the halls of COP than ever before. And so we see initiatives like the Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance, who this week added 6 new members to the alliance, including Tuvalu. We see initiatives like the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, which are saying this process hasn't been dealing with the crux of the problem, so we need some complementary processes to figure out how countries cooperate on phasing out fossil fuels and phasing in energy efficiency and renewable energy. And finally, I will say to my sister from Southeast Asia, I actually see a number of my heroes from Southeast Asia here in the audience, that plastics are the new frontier of the fossil fuel industry trying to justify ongoing expansion and ongoing business as usual by telling us that we need more and more plastics, and that's where their new market is going to be. And so I think part of what us as civil society have to do is to be calling out and shutting down everywhere they happen the new backdoors that the fossil fuel industry and the small number of elites who benefit from the current production are trying to open to continue business as usual, rather than giving us the just and equitable transition that we know we deserve and are demanding.
Thank you, Catherine. I want to check from other panelists.
Just to answer the first and the last question, the challenges that face the world are a reflection of the systems that govern the world, the economic systems that we use largely. So I'll talk about capitalism, how it's very much extractive, how it pushes for much, much more consumption, which has led to the crisis that we face in the world globally, whether it's a climate crisis, whether it's the health crisis, whether it's the extreme inequalities that are around the world. So we need to advance for a systems change across the world, whereby we have systems that allow for regenerative economy, systems that listen to the environment. Human beings cannot live outside the confines of our environment, but we have to be governed and guided by our environment and the space that we live in. Otherwise, we are going to see further increase in all these crises and challenges that we face. And again, just to speak about the framing of the UNFCCC, civil society groups and movements across the globe have to continuously push and advance their agenda. We cannot allow global leaders and corporates to make decisions on behalf of people and then not come up with solutions. So for us, this is a space to continue to push, to lobby. That's why you have seen that we carried out a lot of actions during this COP to ensure that our voices are heard. Despite that, of course, you are excluded from the negotiation rooms, but we still have to use this space to push and advance our voice. And also just to say, of course, the UNFCCC is also within the system that we are trying to fight. And so we have to continuously build the critical mass, build movements that can push for greater accountability and transparency across the globe. Thank you.
Thanks, Lorraine. John, please.
Let me, if I will, co-sign on much of what has been said here already and add to this a little bit. And with regard to your question with regard to plastics, what a lot of people may not know is, and I say this as someone who spent 38 years in the oil and gas industry, is that the oil and gas industry, the fossil fuels we're trying to end, are the fuel source or the precursor chemicals that are used to manufacture those plastics. If we end the age of fossil fuels, you end the age of plastics. But what they're trying to do in talking about transitioning to that, to plastics production, is really extending the age of fossil fuels. We're not going to be able to get out of it because you're going to still have to manufacture and process those base chemicals and base oils in order to get the chemicals you need to make the plastics. So what's our solution? Our solution is to go to other forms of packaging and other things we can use that do not require the use of fossil fuels. And part of that is going to be driven two ways to attack the supply chain. One is that our voices have to be elevated. Those people you talked about, the fishermen and regular everyday folk, are going to have to demand that these companies that are using plastics no longer use it, because we're going to stop buying your product. When there's no demand, then the product goes away. Also, to look at using more of the alternatives and encourage those companies that are using alternate forms to do so, and also the companies that have the other forms of plastics to get away from them and transition over. We have to attack the supply chain on the user end as well as on the production end. And that requires everyone having a part and a role in it, from the smallest person to the greatest and largest users, and even companies and businesses. All have a role to play, and if we all do our part, then we can change this, because I've seen the great patch and what it's like, and we've all contributed to it. And we also contribute by using your nation to so-called recycle plastics, when all they're really doing is either burning them and putting them back in the atmosphere. And what, like I said again, those are the same chemicals that we are already saying are toxic and are poisonous. So we've got to get away from it, just like we're saying right here. We have to transition completely away and phase out fossil fuels. That's the only choice we have. To the question of the UN, and I agree with my sister here, that's the vehicle that we have. We got to use what we got to get what we want. We have to use those venues and those occasions to speak. But what has happened is we have allowed the petrochemical industry, big oil, gas, and coal, to co-opt our message. We've allowed them to do, as unfortunately I'll say Joe Manchin, Senator Manchin in the United States, to basically co-opt the message and take over the narrative. Whenever you let someone take over the narrative of your story, it's no longer your story, it's theirs. So what we have to do here at COP and in our individual homes and communities is to reassert that narrative, to reassert the facts about what is being promoted as a solution when it is actually a false solution, and then provide alternatives and work and strive and fight to have them. The reason why the voices here are muted is because the moneyed lobbied interests have taken over. So we've got to get them out of our business, while at the same time elevating our voices and make sure that people know exactly what's going on, or as we like to say, what time it is. If we do that and work together and work with the instruments that are there, because we need each other. We can't afford to isolate ourselves. No man is an island. We're all a part of this planet. There's only one planet A. There's no other alternative. So we have to work together, but we have to work together in the confines of those things that are there. But if they don't serve us, then we must reinvent those things. We must have a forum or venue where our voices can be heard, where what we propose gets the attention it needs, and then bring those people in that are willing to work with us and be allies toward achieving that goal. Only then are we going to truly and effectively end the age of fossil fuels and the influence of fossil fuel money on our world and on our cultures and on our peoples.
Thank you, John. Jean?
On the question of the United Nations, that's a fantastic question, and the question that I think most of us who are part either observing the talks or part of the talks ask themselves every year when it comes to crunch time. I think one of the most fascinating parts of this COP right now and the UN system is that we are seeing the geopolitics of fossil fuels play out in real time here. It is a testament to every single person who has fought a fossil fuel project, every single lawsuit, every single protest, every single action, that fossil fuels is on the agenda finally here at the COP. One of the interesting parts is that fossil fuels is nowhere in the Paris Agreement. Everybody knows that. fossil fuels, because of that, is nowhere in any particular negotiating track. So there is no dedicated negotiators to this fossil fuel issue. The people who we know are negotiating right now are the heads of delegations because they are being forced by civil society and by the world and by any 5-year-old who will tell you that the culprit of the climate emergency is fossil fuels to answer up, to pay out. And at this moment, at this COP, all eyes are on this fossil fuel question because everybody knows this is the source, and delegates are now forced to face it head on. They're facing it separately in their domestic fronts nationally, but this is the only place in the world on a global stage where all of them must face it together. That's why this is such an important COP and a breakthrough moment as to whether fossil fuels will make it into this final decision text. We made progress last year, the first progress in 26 years, but we must absolutely go further and push the COP presidency of Egypt to work with the United States, the EU, the UK, Tuvalu, low-lying states, to put in black and white this commitment to phase out oil, gas, and coal. We are on the precipice of potentially winning, and all of us in this room and around the world need to put the pressure on governments to make this happen.
Thank you, Jean. Thank you, Minister from Tuvalu. He had to leave for another appointment. And sadly, the Minister of Colombia is running late. So I want to basically double check, especially because I see people coming in and out, if there is any other question from journalists especially that we haven't captured. Otherwise, I want to thank you all, and I want to repeat our call for the Egyptian presidency to listen to the call of the African, to the listen of the call of the communities, to the listen of the call of the civil society, to listen to the call of the science. Failure to address fossil fuel phase out in this COP is a failure for this COP, and that will be recorded on them. Thank you.
And I'll just say the Minister from Colombia will be available for interviews, so if you're interested in that, please approach one of us. Of course, we're all available for interviews. We're sticking around, but probably the Minister is most exciting.